Fight!
Hey everybody, welcome back to the second video in our making of a Minecraft character series. So this is our character that we've been working on. This is the Minecraft Creeper, as they say. And one thing I forgot to mention in the last video is that if you guys are interested in just like buying this character, buying the 3D file, you can hop on over to my website where I'll just have the digital file available for sale. So you can just purchase the digital file, send it off to a printer yourself, and just get it printed without going through the hassle of having to learn, a complex software like Zbrush. But for the rest of you, let's continue on with our project. And this is kind of where things ended up here. I'll tab over to Zbrush, and obviously it's looking pretty silly. So I think what we're going to do is just continue to push our proportions initially, and then we're going to start to carve in the face, and then start to add all these other little fun details here, including working on our base. So in this video, we have a lot to cover, to get into. We have a lot of detailing to do. So, and this is an intro series. So let's just dive right into it. So if I'll tab back, the first thing I notice is that his head is like a little bit bigger in the concept. So I'm gonna push that a little bit. And one way that you can isolate that is if I hit Shift F to turn on my poly wireframe, you'll notice that everything's red. Both of these objects are red, but they're still not connected topologically, meaning these two objects aren't yet really merged together, which is good for us. And I want to change these to be different colors so I can isolate those. So I'm going to come over here to Poly Groups and click on this Auto Groups button. And as you can see when you mouse over, it says Auto Group by Topological Continuity. Just lots of big words for saying if they're separate objects, it'll give you different colors for the separate objects. And this is kind of hard to see. Let's just click it again. You can see this is like a pink color, this is a red color, which means we can now isolate this guy easily by holding Control Shift and then left clicking on one of the points or one of the vertices of that poly group. So now we have this guy isolated, and we can just come up here to our transform gizmo and then center, click this button here to center our pivot. And because we have symmetry turned on, it centers towards the symmetrical side. If we were to turn that off and re-click that, it's going to center to the center of the object. Lots of centers in that sentence. I apologize for that. But I want to scale this guy up just a little bit and then squash like that. And then I also want to deflate the model a little bit, square it up a little bit, if you will. So I'm just going to go to the inflate button and kind of like drag this to the left. And then Control Shift left click outside of that to bring back all of our groups, to unhide everything, if you will. And this is kind of what we're looking like. So the other thing I wanted to show you is a fun thing called Dynamesh. And if you come over here to Geometry, to that drop down, and you scroll down here, you see this Dynamesh right here, and you see this little slider with a number. And if I just click Dynamesh, just click that button, you'll see what it does to my topology. So I'll undo to show you again. Click the button, and it just gives me an evenly distributed amount of polygons so that I can easily work with the mesh however I want. It's kind of giving you a chunk of clay to work with, essentially, is the way I like to see it, coming from a more traditional sculpture background. So it's just giving me polygons to work with, essentially. So now if I were to come over here and choose like the clay buildup brush, for example, and just with my symmetry turned on, hitting X, just come in here, and if we Alt tab back over, I got one big eye, one little eye, one big open mouth. Maybe I'll just start by kind of holding Alt and just sculpting in that mouth shape like this. And this is probably not the best way to do it, but I just wanted you to get a sense of what it's like to model on Dynamesh as opposed to our other topology. So it's going to look kind of ugly for now because it's kind of low res. And let's say we really push this in. So I'll crank my intensity like so, holding Alt, and just really push that in. And you're starting to see these stretched polygons. If I hit Shift F, you can see the polygons that are stretching. And this is where Dynamesh comes in handy. So now if I come out here to the side of my geometry, so I'm not on the inside, I'm out here. If I hold Control and then drag a rectangle and then let go, it re-Dynameshed my area. So I'll undo that to show you again. So the stretchy polygons, now keep an eye on these guys when I re-Dynamesh. Oops. Re-Dynameshing, it just redistributed polygons where I needed it to be, which is awesome. And there's another way you can do this too. You can actually turn on this button right here called Sculptris Pro Mode. I know it's a lot to take in, but just stay with me. With the clay buildup brush, now if I were to sculpt holding Alt, it actually generates polygons as I'm sculpting, which is awesome. And it works really, really well with some brushes, others not so much. But you know, with the clay buildup brush, and especially with one of my favorite brushes, the snake hook brush, if I have that button on and I go like this, it'll generate the polygons I need as I drag these guys out like crazy. Just so cool. If I were to turn that off and do it, you can see what happens with my polygons. It can't cut it. So that's the differences between like Sculptris Pro mode, using that button. And I don't recommend this all the time. I use it on very specific cases with very specific brushes. But I'm actually going to undo now because I didn't necessarily want to connect this just yet. And one way to get around that, I apologize, my navigation can get a little crazy sometimes. One way to get around that, using just this guy's head over here. So now I'm on the front. I'm just going to undo. And now I've gone back to my clean topology state. And now you can come over here and click on groups, keep that button on. I'm going to crank my resolution to 2 something and then hit Dynamesh and then see what happens. And so now you'll notice that because those were separate polygroups, it still maintained that separation in the topology. So these are still separate objects. And this is a way you can work on multiple objects that are still contained within the same subtool just by keeping them a separate polygroup using Dynamesh. So it's a pretty rad technique to use too. Other than that, I think for now what we could probably do is, I guess we don't really need to keep these separate, so we'll just re-Dynamesh these back together, and you'll see that now these are they're one object now, okay? And you'll see we also have our polygonal faceting. That's what these lines are right here. So if I undo again, I apologize, we'll get through this. We see that faceting on the clean topology too, so what I'm going to do to get around that is just hit Control D and subdivide 2 or 3 times, and then delete lower, and then run my Dynamesh at 2 something, and then leave groups off is fine, and then hit Dynamesh. And now we don't have that faceting anymore, everything's nice and smooth. Okay. So now what I want to do is start to curve, like Irish accent kind of there, coming out my Irish ancestry, I guess. Carve in the mouth and the eye holes. So one way we can do that is, we can do that several ways. But a good teaching opportunity is if we hold Control and have our mask pen as the active tool here, we can actually just start Control dragging, Control left clicking on the mesh, and we can kind of paint this mask on here. And so it looks like, you know, if I Alt tab over, he's got one big old tooth in the middle, which is cool. And now if I want to invert that mask, I can hold Control Alt left click. So Control click just draws the mask. Control Alt actually does the invert of that mask, the inverse. Okay, so I'm just going to draw the mouth shape, and then we'll do 2 kind of square eyes. I like the eyes a little more wide set. That's kind of fun. And you can kind of feather the edge of this mask by Control left clicking and tapping, and you can resharpen that by holding Control Alt and left clicking and tapping, and it'll kind of clean up your lines naturally for you. And then I want this to all go in to push it to extrude into the face a little bit. So in order to do that, if I were to actually use my snake hook brush and start pushing stuff around, you'll notice it doesn't affect that masked area. So I'm going to invert my mask by Control left clicking and tapping outside of my model, and now I have that as the controllable area. And you could just use the snake hook and pull that in if you'd like. That totally works. And then you can hold Shift and kind of smooth that inner edge a little. One thing I'm going to do though is just use my transform gizmo. And if the transform gizmo, you know, is way off over here, you can just come over here and just recenter. It'll go to the unmasked center, and then grab this blue arrow and then scoot it back in that space. So we'll just do that for now, and because we see our stretchy polygons, we're going to run a re-Dynamesh by Control left clicking and dragging outside of our model and making sure our symmetry is turned on. We can come in here with a smooth and kind of smooth out some of these little jagged polygons, and It's looking pretty good. Starting to look more like a creeper, I think. And I'm gonna continue to Alt-Tab over and just making sure that things are looking okay. And then I'm just gonna start. I think I'm just gonna go to town with the detail work. So this is where you get to kind of just have fun and discover new brushes. For me, what I like to do in this like medium, large detailing phase is really jump into the clay buildup brush. And just like, I wanted to get some of those wrinkles under the neck that's in the concept. And, you know, like maybe some eyebrow shapes up here. You could also just take the clay buildup and kind of maybe push the mouth in just a little bit more. Obviously, we're getting the stretching in the polygons that we don't like, so just remember to rerun your Dynameshes and then smooth and just kind of continue that process. And then making sure you're hitting smooth. And sometimes the smooth brush doesn't work very well if your poly count is too high. And there's a few ways to get around that. One of the ways is you can come over here to the Lightbox tools and go over to the brush tab. Come over here and you can see there's all these amazing like hidden brushes within ZBrush that you can grab from. And you can come over here to the smooth folder and double click into that guy and then click on smooth stronger and just hit OK. And now this is your new default smooth brush. So now if you smooth, you notice you get a much stronger influence there. And so that's a brush I really like to use. I almost always use that by default. Like first thing I'll just go in and load the smooth stronger brush and just use that. And you can always turn its intensity down if it's too much, you know. I think I'm gonna add like a little bit of a like an elbow joint kind of here, because that's kind of what's in the concept, and just kind of rotate that guy just a little bit. And then so I'm just using my transform gizmo. I should mention this. This is the original. This is like the new transform gizmo that ZBrush has implemented in the last few versions. And if you click on this button again, it'll let you use the legacy or the old transform gizmo, which looks kind of like some joints for a skeleton or something for a rig. And so you can just click and drag anywhere, and you'll just drag that guy out. So you can practice that. I like to bounce between these two gizmos. I think there's a reason they left the old one in, because it's still pretty powerful. And in this case, I want to like kind of rotate everything back. It's just slightly like that. And so, yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to do with that. And the way you do that is you drag so that this is your initial pivot, and then these are your secondary third pivots. And you can just grab the inner red circle here. You can grab right here to move the gizmo itself. And if you mouse over to the middle, this is actually going to move the object itself. It's a little bit confusing, but this one is really powerful too, especially when you're using transpose to pose your characters in dynamic poses and stuff. I really like this one. So I'm going to continue to just use my clay build-up brush and just go around the character. Add like a little neck fold underneath there. I'm switching over to my damn standard brush now. Just going to kind of carve those in a little. Just the shape using my original transform gizmo. And just continue to like maybe sharpen up the edges of this guy just a little. And I want to add some of these jutting masses that's it's going to help with our profile shape a little bit to look a little bit cuter and less odd. So I think what I want to do now is just make a mushroom brush that I can use to just insert the mushrooms all around the character, and then we can pull out these like little jutting masses and maybe add some of the nails to the feet and things. So we'll start with that now. And actually, I think I probably want to do is probably just go ahead and make this other eye a little bit smaller. Like I like the other eye being big and crazy looking. A little bit more frowny. Just kind of going around with my clay buildup and trying to break up some of this profile a little. Might be worth coming into the legs too and just control. So we're still in our clean topology with these guys. So I'm just going to do our same thing where I subdivide and then delete lower and then run a Dynamesh at like a couple hundred and just switch those guys over to Dynamesh as well. And looks like our radial symmetry is still on, so I'm good to continue to try to see if that will work. Looks like it's kind of working for the time being. Turn on solo mode and see, it looks like these edges are all connected, which I guess is fine for now. And I think what I did in the concept is I had like these little nails for the feet. So let's try and add those guys. And I'm just going to use my clay buildup brush and just try to push those nails out. We're starting to turn on solo mode and re-Dynamesh. Control and right click and drag or re-Dynamesh. I'm using snake hook too to kind of pull those out. And then using clay buildup, I want to add this little fold of skin that comes around the top of the nail. I want this guy to kind of look like a blobby kind of monster, like a Swamp Thing monster for all you old folks. Remember the Swamp Thing movies? And then Damien Standard. Add some creases in the legs here. Maybe using clay buildup to add some kneecaps, kind of. And you see that our symmetry is just off, so I'm just going to come in here. I think what I'm going to do is just turn off symmetry by hitting X, and then just isolate using my select lasso this time. So holding Control Shift, and then select lasso, and just select the one side that I'm working on that I'm happy with. And then you'll notice that everything else is still there. Like if I hit Control Shift and left click, it's all still there. It's not deleted yet. And so a way to actually delete what's hidden, you can come over here and just click this delete hidden button in the geometry drop down, just hit delete hidden. And now if I Control Shift left click tap, nothing's gonna show up. So I want to close these holes here too, because there's holes in my geometry. And you can do that two ways. You can just run a Dynamesh like that and it'll close the holes, or you can go to modify topology, close holes, and then rerun your Dynamesh. So now we've got just this one leg that we're working on, and let's just make this thing look pretty, and then we'll mirror and weld that across the X and the Z axis. So just adding this fun little hoof like nail things that we got going here. And again, you can always come in here and up your resolution on your Dynamesh. You probably double it at this point because we're still seeing the polygons. And I'm using the Damien Standard brush to just carve in some like nail detail. And then just to do further details. And then clay buildup. So again, like I said, it's like a lot of the same brushes that you've kind of just use over and over. And then you just smooth everything back. And just remember too that as you're doing this detailing, when you print it small, some of these details won't show up unless you really push them. So just be sure to emphasize the details a little bit more, especially if you're doing for scale miniatures or for you're printing at a much smaller scale than, obviously we're pushed up, we're so close right now, we'll never see this model this big, even at 6 inches. So just always remember, okay, is this detail going to show? Is it worth my effort? Because there's only one, I only have one life. Got to just optimize where I can. So add some of those details. Remember to look at your concepts, see what we got going there. I've got some like kind of organic-y bumps and things that we'll probably add after the fact. If I turn off solo mode, we'll see how that's looking. And then I'm going to come back to modify topology and do a mirror and weld on X and Z. And then it's going to do that for us nicely. And I think what the issue is that it's just not centered on the axis, on the grid. So that's probably why things aren't working out very well. Using snake hook. going to continue to go around and maybe pull out some little branches here and there. And one thing that I love to use is when I'm pulling out like extremities or things like that. One of my favorite brushes, if you come over to here, you can also hit B on your keyboard to bring up the brush menu. I love the curved tube brush. So I think in my concept I have a bunch kind of these little tiny jutting masses and little branch type things that are shooting out of him. And I don't want it to look like arms because he doesn't really have arms, but it's going to be the diameter of whatever your brush size is, the inner circle there, or the outer circle. So just keep that in mind as you're drawing these around. And the reason I like to use this because it keeps like a constant, like a cylindrical mass. So if I were to come in here and then re-dynamesh those into the geo, I could then come back and just hit smooth on them and just kind of smooth those back into the surface. But if I was also to use my snake hook brush, which I was going to mention earlier, and then just drag these out, it does it in a way that it's based on that camera angle, and the mass isn't perfectly round. So sometimes you really want that to be the case, and so you just use the cylinder insert to kind of maintain that mass. Okay, so this is helping with our profile a little bit, look a little less weird. Just go around with the curved tubes. You can also do just adjust the size too, and you'll notice that when you draw these things out, I should have mentioned this earlier, it comes with this little line here, right, in this little circle, and it's similar to the transform gizmo I was showing you earlier, where it just gives you control. So if I was a left click and drag on this, I can still move it around because I still have that control, right? This one actually just like uses this kind of interesting like simulation to kind of pull it around. Like if I was to go like this, you know, it would follow that around like a snake kind of thing. It's kind of cool, but we don't really need that. So I want to just get rid of this after I've moved it into place, and you can just left click tap anywhere to get rid of your little control rig. So it's a pretty cool little feature they've got there. This little contact point needs to be inflated out, so I'm going to use the inflate brush, which is one of my favorites. And then I say I want this top of this guy to be flat like we did with the base before. I'm just going to Control Shift left click on this guy, come over to my clip curve, and then draw that line with a gradient facing upward, and it's going to slice that guy real good for me. One thing I haven't done in a while is I'm going to save, and sometimes this save button is relatively new to ZBrush, like this basic save brush. I know it's our button. I know it sounds silly, but for years we just had the save as. So we just have to click save as every single time, and then you could just manually save, and then it would just work. Okay. Now, so they added this button. Sometimes that breaks when you use certain plugins like Transpose Master. It's something like a ticket that needs to be submitted to Maxon. But if it does break, just use Save As, and then you can just hit Save and it'll be fine. But always the Save As button always works every time. And then you can just hit Save Next to version up to version 3. So I want to flatten out the top of this guy too a little bit. So I'm going to slice that guy. I like slicing and dicing. And no, I'm not a serial killer. Slicing that guy, slicing this guy. And then remember to use like snake hook to kind of add that. Like they're kind of like broken branches, kind of. They're like just sticking out of this thing. I'm going to be kind of angry. I'm going to inflate out those eyebrows just a smidge. And then, you know, another thing, if you wanted to add like vines that were kind of like, you could go to curve tube snap, and then on this one it actually will snap to the geo as you draw it around, which I use this one a lot too. But for this guy, I don't think I want to add any vines necessarily. I kind of want to make him just look like a mossy, vegetative kind of mass, like the swamp thing that just has a bunch of, you know, like some hanging vine, or not vines, but moss and things like that. So yeah, maybe this is just a tree trunk basically. I don't know what they're supposed to be. My kids don't know the lore behind it, so I'm not a huge Minecraft player. I played a little bit, and I get the appeal, but it's that basic look for me. It doesn't rope me in. Being an artist, I just don't want it to look good. Okay, so let's add some mushrooms. I think that's going to help too with our overall shape, because right now, yeah, like I says, I don't know what's going on with this thing. So let's hit save, and then let's go ahead. We're going to make our own insert mesh brush, and we haven't even talked about what those are, and I'll show you an example. They have a bunch of insert mesh brushes, and so we'll start with these basic primitives here for now. And if you click on that button, it's going to load up all of these primitives up here along the top, and you can click and drag left to right. Sometimes these have dozens and dozens of shapes. But right now our active is this H octosphere. So if I were to click and drag on the character, it'll bring out these little spheres, which are cool. It'd be kind of like little warts or something. We could totally use that. Maybe just place a few of those around. Yeah, kind of like that. And then remember to re-dynamesh everything into it, and then it'll just combine that stuff in. Because when you use an insert mesh brush, it's actually inserting a separate geo topologically to the mesh for the most part here. So we want those to all be combined. So I'm just inflating and making sure that contact point was working. And then from here, let's say we don't have what we need, right? I mean, there's tons of brushes you can grab. There's just like so many of them, and so like you never have to model a belt buckle again, which is amazing. You know, we have these cool like strap brushes. You can make like these military straps, and like there's ammo and all these cool little things that you can just insert. And this is like actually an insert multi-mesh thing. So what this does is similar to our curved tubes that snaps around. You can drag these interesting like chain things around. You could do that. I bet there's cool vine brushes too. Looks like there's one right here. So there's some cool vines that you could like wrap around, which may be something we should do for sure. I don't know if these ones are working too good though. You could probably find some better ones online for free that'll work better. That's really the advantage. There's a pretty big community. There's a lot of free brushes, and usually they're really cheap, even if they're like nice brushes. Premium brushes are pretty cheap, like $5 or whatever. You can just go grab. But we are going to be wizards, and that's another thing. You can sell your insert mesh brushes too, if you like. But we're going to make one right now, and the first thing I'm going to do to get started with that is I'm going to append a sphere 3D. Make sure this is my active subtool, okay? And let's shape this into the shape of a mushroom. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use our fancy radial symmetry on Y, click on the little R, and then crank our radials count to like 17 or something is fine. And then we're going to use our clay buildup brush. And then I'm just going to start sculpting out for the top of the mushroom. I'm going to pop that guy out and smoothing. And then I'm going to hold Alt to push it in. Okay. And then I'm going to remember to re-dynamesh. Now if you do that, you click like this and nothing happens, it's because that mesh was never activated as a dynamesh. So just make sure that you come to dynamesh and then crank up your resolution a little bit and click the button, make sure that button's on. And now when you rerun your dynamesh, it's going to run, it's going to work properly. Just continue to push those details. I love the radial symmetry, it's super fun. So I'm just holding Alt and going up there and just pushing the details in. And, you can always come back up here and change your radial count. You can do like 3 or 4 if you don't want to get too crazy. Want to be able to add some less repetitive kind of details. I'm going to turn off radial symmetry for now, and I want this stem to kind of curve like this so that I can get it to. So I'm going to scoot this guy up just a little, like that. Yeah, there we go. And then I'm going to use my curve tube brush, turn off radial symmetry with X, and then I'm just going to drag the shape of my vine like this. Actually, I want it to be a little bit skinnier. Okay, and you'll notice that it didn't do it in the right position. So now that we still have our control rig, we can still move this guy. Whoops, wrong side. We'll just click this guy and move it to the center. So now our little vine is centered there. And then I'm going to inflate out the base, just add some thickness there. Remember, thickness too based on the durability of your print too, or whatever material you're printing in. If you're printing in a resin, you probably want things to be a little bit thicker and more durable. There's some good tough resins out there that should hold up. The other thing I'm going to do here is just kind of inflate out all these details just a little. You can turn radial symmetry back on, but realize that as you go down this stem here, it's going to break, right? It's not going to maintain that radial symmetry all around the loop. But you could come in here with a Damien standard too and add some interesting kind of striations. And then turn back on radial symmetry and just kind of want to push this up just a little. And then crank my radial count back up to 20 or so. Just kind of fluff out the top just a little. Alright, so that's pretty cool. I think it's a decent looking mushroom. Re-Dynamesh. And from here, what I'm going to do, okay, is now we have to turn this into a brush. So the way that you do that is the brush, the way that it drags out is dependent on your camera angle. So right now I'm looking at this from like a profile perspective, right? The head is to the side, and that's exactly what we want for now. So I'm going to go to brush. I'm going to come over here to create, and the very top button is create insert mesh. Just click OK on that, and just click new. And so this is now a brush that we have made that we can now click and use on our actual character. So now if we come back to this guy and I were to click and drag, it automatically makes your new insert mesh brush your new brush. If I were to click and drag, you'll notice it'll just drag this guy out, okay? And it looks like it might have grabbed the wrong angle. That's interesting. Okay. So what we need to do is just come back to this, and I think maybe it works from the front. So if we come to the front and then center this and then rotate to the side like that, let's try this. And then we'll just do create insert mesh and just do a new one again and see if that works better. Yeah, it works a little bit better. So now it's like it's kind of working, kind of not. But either way, it's still going to work. So let's look at our concept real quick. So we got one jutting out of the corner of the head right here. So let's just click and drag our mushroom right here. And it's obviously not working. But if we click on rotate, then our gizmo is going to be able to allow us to kind of rotate this guy into place. I know that's handsy, but it is what it is. We got to just make it happen. And I'm kind of obviously new to making my own brushes, so I'm sure there's somebody that knows better how to orient that guy. And I think you could probably come over here to brushes and then do like, you could adjust the, not the curve, but maybe the depth or something like that. You can play around, orientation right here. So spin center, maybe play around with like that. I don't know. Anyway, I think for now that's fine though. Let's just leave that guy in there. But what's cool about it still is we don't have to do that work over and over and over. We don't have to make a million mushrooms like we have. So let's just look at our character and just figure out where those guys are at, and then just like their size, and then just like we'll just have to go back and just rotate those guys into the geo. Kind of just, it gets a little handsy, but there's one like sticking straight up out of the top. Maybe if you're watching and you're more of a ZBrush Pro, I should definitely know how to do this, but you could let me know in the comments below what I'm doing wrong here. And then just add another one right here in the neck area. In the concept, I had the little bumps, like little freckles, kind of on the top, the spots on top of those guys. I didn't add those obviously in the brush, but you could add those like in the paint level, you know, when you paint this guy. Or so in order to switch out of insert mesh mode, you can hit Q on your keyboard. So just a heads up there. And then because everything else is masked after it's inserted, you can still kind of like, if you want to, easily adjust the stem. You come in here too and add little chunks that have been kind of like broken off, or little slits that have been cut in, and little split areas. So I have another one like maybe down, turn off solo. So we've got a sweet mustache now from that original mushroom. And I'll just scale it or move that down in Y just to get that out of the way. We'll come back here and get our brush again and just insert another one back here. Here. Oh, it's driving me crazy. Let's figure that out real quick. So, with our insert mesh, somehow we have inserted those on the wrong subtool, and that's not a problem. We can always switch those back up to our character by, we can come over here and just switch back our clip, holding Control Shift, switch back to our select lasso. So Control Shift, lasso, and then come and lasso these two guys, and now they're in the visible layer. We can come over here to split and then split hidden, and now it's going to split the other one that's not visible into its own subtool conveniently. And then we can just come back up here to our main character, excuse me, and then just merge that down with the visible subtool. So we'll merge that down, and now those mushrooms are all combined in this same subtool. I think the only way I've ever had this really work nicely is just by doing the top down solution. So if you're rotating and you hold Shift, it'll snap you to the nearest orthographical view. Okay, so as you rotate, just hit Shift on your keyboard and it'll snap to the very top view. And then once you're in that perspective, you can come up here to Brush, and we'll just create a new Insert Mesh Brush, click New. And now this way, if you drag, it seems to always kind of come out the right way, but you're still gonna have to rotate it the right direction. It's just the weird little stem on this guy's kind of just being difficult. But I think overall that solution is the best solution. Let's have that guy pop directly out, and then we'll just rotate it again in. Now I'm not gonna do like a million of these things, so we'll just do like a dozen or so. And the other ones that I have are these kind of interesting, fun. If I'll tab over, I have these interesting half mushrooms that kind of just jut right out of the sides of trees and things. So I definitely want to incorporate some of those guys. So we'll probably just make a new one, and we can actually just make that out of our current mushroom. So we'll just come up here, down here to the bottom. And one thing you can do too, if this is something like where you have a lot of subtools and you want to just have them isolated, so the ones that you're working on, this can get really confusing here, because you can have dozens of subtools. And so you're like, what if I want to work on just one? And you alt click to this guy, and you want to merge to a specific one beneath it. What you can do is, to keep them all organized, you can just go to your subtool, just click on your subtool. Then holding Shift, click this arrow right here, and it'll snap it to the bottom of the stack or the top of the stack. And I just consider either the bottom or the top my work area between active subtools. And so that's one way to kind of get around, like, this is our working subtool right now. This is the one we're actively working on. So I'm going to grab this guy, hold Shift, and snap it to the bottom if it already isn't. And maybe that'll make sense later on as we get more subtools. I'm going to duplicate this guy, and now we're just going to try to make one of those interesting little half mushrooms that are just kind of jutting out of the side. And I'm going to start by deleting my stem, holding Control Shift and selecting the rectangle selection tool, and then drag a rectangle holding Alt, and then I'm just going to, Control Shift left click drag, hold Alt, and then it inverts the selection. And now that's gone to the hidden layer, and now let's make sure it's deleted by coming to Modify Topology, delete hidden, close holes, or rerun our Dynamesh on that guy. And then those other ones are kind of like half mushrooms that just stick out of the sides of things. So let's just go ahead and use this time we'll use our knife curve brush. And I'm going to make sure I save because this brush is awesome, but it has a tendency to crash Zbrush. So especially if your poly count's high, and I wouldn't consider this poly count very high, but now that we have that as our active slash brush, knife brush, we can hold Control Shift, and then again it's just following the gradient. So drag that guy like so, and then it'll just slice. And one thing this does better than say the clip curve brush is that one just pushes all the polygons onto that one plane, which is not what we want in this case. We don't want to have to clean up all these weird little polys right here. We just wanted to slice it, and so that's why I went with that solution. So we still have our symmetry too, so let's see if we can use our symmetry to kind of gain the shape of that particular mushroom. I should probably be looking at reference, but I'm just going to wing it for now. I feel like they just kind of look similar to like this kind of shape. And then they kind of come to a point or whatever down here. And yeah. And so you could come in here and holding Control, switch over to Mask Lasso, and maybe just select like a chunk like this. And then go to invert your selection by Control left clicking and tapping. Holding Control Shift, switch to your clip curve, and then if you come into the geo and run that clip, it's going to push it all back into space a little bit and add like an interesting little slash into there. Or you could have just like used the Damien standard brush and just kind of like slashed it in like that. I find this method to be a little bit handsier, but there's multiple ways to kind of get that those interesting little cuts in the shape there. The former was probably the better option, but this is working too. And then another brush, which is one of my favorites, is the pinch brush. So I come over here, go to my brushes, hitting B, and then hit P, and then I. And this is the pinch brush. And one thing I'll do with the pinch brush is I'll just scale it up really large and just like start running it. And it does some really interesting things with the proportions. They're sometimes really cool. It's like a happy accident. If you're a Bob Ross fan, who isn't, by the way? I don't even know why I had to ask that. Yeah, so use the pinch brush. It'll do some fun things with your forms. And now we want to make a brush out of this guy. So let's just, again, right-clicking and holding Shift and snapping to the top view. We'll come over here to Brush and go to Insert Mesh Brush. And this time we'll say Append, just for fun. And see what it does. Let's see if it worked. Hold on one sec. I don't think it worked because that wasn't the active. Let's do this. So I think you have to be on the brush that you want to append to, and then come over here like this guy, and then we'll do brush, create insert mesh, and then do append, and pressing M. Okay, so now if we hit M on that brush, we can now see that we've got those two mushrooms to choose from. And like I said, you could take a day or take an hour or two, make a mushroom brush, and you could sell that, and like people would buy that from you. You pick the mundane, kind of boring things that people don't really want to have to take the time to make, and those things will sell like crazy. Just sell it on TurboSquid or your own Gumroad or your own website. And I have sold a number of my switch brushes for like dials and switches and different knobs and things. And I think what I'm actually going to do with that one actually is frame it up, and I'm just going to rotate that down like this, and then rerun that, and I'm just going to make a new one for now. So now that way it'll be oriented. Oops. Remember, if things get off like this, you can just hit F to frame things up, and now it'll just, whoops, I used the wrong side. Man, I keep failing at this. Use this side. Let's do this first. Take that way. This. Just make sure that that side is oriented towards camera. Whoops. Yeah, I think that's right. And then do a new, oops, not multi-row. I don't know why, I might have just broke the world. Oh, what a mess. Okay, new insert mesh, new, and let's try that. Frame it up. Man, mine's not working very well. I'm like super botching this. What am I doing wrong? Maybe I just have to have it. Like so, maybe. Center on the grid, maybe. Like that. New. I have a billion new brushes, guys. Ah, there we go. So now it's jutting out of that like I would expect, but I want it to insert more into the mesh. And the way that you can do that is come over here to brush, and then come over to depth, and then this is the depth at which this is. So this is the surface of your mesh and the inside of the mesh. I just drop the circle down like this, and now if I click and drag, it'll be more inside of the mesh, which is exactly what I want. That's probably a little too much. I'm gonna be nitpicky and bring that back out a little bit. And now if I can just drag these guys around, and they look pretty freaking sweet. And remember to use your transform gizmo to add some variation there. Very nice. And 2 or 3 right by each other. They seem to kind of cluster together. It's too big. Probably heard that I was using my mouse. I tend to do that. I'm old school. I have a Cintiq here, which is obviously ideal for sculpting, which I highly recommend. But I still catch myself using my mouse sometimes, like it's 1994. So this is helping, like overall, adding these things are definitely helping our shapes, like making things look less goofy. And remember, it's pretty dark, so I can just control left click and drag because everything was masked because of all my insert mesh stuff. And let's continue to Alt tab over to our concept and see what we like. So I need to sculpt in more detail, more kind of blobby, kind of like, you know, Swamp Thing kind of details in that. So I think that's what it's lacking at the moment. So I'm just going to Alt tab over, and then I'm going to switch back to my Damien standard brush and kind of add some of the, you know, some of these details. I don't have symmetry on because I personally, with a lot of this type of work, I don't like symmetry. I like to kind of veer off of that. I think that adds a whole nother level of interest. You know, making this eye smaller than this eye. Yeah. So just keep going around, and you'll notice that we haven't dynameshed everything together just yet. These are still separate meshes, and I kind of want to keep it that way for the time being, just because it still gives me the freedom of adjusting things as needed. So it might be worth adding like some little interesting kind of contact points here at the legs. You know, I think that always kind of helps. Cheated and used symmetry for this work, obviously. So I just have to do it twice instead of 4 times. And yeah, as you get to the sides in like areas where, you know, your eyes aren't going to see the same side at the same time, like by all means jump into symmetry mode and just continue to add this fun stuff. Yeah, I mean, you could this you could do for hours. You could just kind of swim around the model and add this kind of this interesting little growth here. It has some contact points too. Some kind of a boil or something, you know. And you'll notice that my symmetry was on, which kind of sucks. So we'll have to clean that up just a little. I'm using H polish because I find that that's a really good way to kind of push things back. Just using standard. This is kind of just a cool little toy, you know, you can make for one of your buddies who's an avid Minecraft fan. That you can surprise him on his birthday or whatever. I am going to walk through the 3D printing process of this too. I'm going to talk about the resins that I prefer to use, what printer I use. So I'm going to go through that entire process in the 4th video, so stick around for that. Looks like we're at about 50 minutes for the detailing, which is getting a little bit longer than I wanted to get, but this is fun to kind of get lost in. I might actually speed up the video too while I'm doing some of this stuff. Just trying to make it look goopy, you know, and one thing I can't stress enough too is to make sure that your character is kind of always looking up when you're in ZBrush. I know it sounds odd, but when you print this guy as a little figurine and it's sitting on your desk, you're always going to be looking down on it. I guarantee you, you're almost rarely ever, if ever, going to be looking directly at or up to your object unless it's like on a shelf somewhere. But for the most part, I find that I'm looking down on these. So they look like they're looking down when I print them, when I print them straight like this. So I like to cheat them facing up a little bit. And I know it might be a little bit exaggerated to you right now, but trust me, when you get this thing printed at scale, it's going to it's going to feel right. It's going to feel like it's looking kind of more straight. And then another thing I wanted to add, I'm actually going to re-Dynamesh this right now. So at this point, I'm committed to these mushrooms, right? They're now embedded into my mesh. They're not a separate object any longer. And so I wanted to add like some hangy, like kind of like moss type stuff. So you could use a snake hook. And again, you could turn on Sculptris Pro and just kind of start pulling stuff out a little bit. And just kind of add some little hangy moss type bits. And this can get a little chuggy with Sculptris Pro mode on, depending on your machine. My machine, I think I've got 96 gigs DDR4, and I'm running a Ryzen Threadripper 24 core processor, so it's a pretty decent setup still to this day, even though it's getting old. And it runs it pretty well, but you can see it's getting kind of chuggy. So now I've pulled some of these things out and they're looking kind of weird. Just make sure you're rotating around and getting those into place. And you could add some little moss coming down from these guys too. And some right here. We could just do clay buildup, turn off Sculptris Pro, and then just kind of like make this feel more like it's kind of hanging. Get that guy out. Maybe there's some. And re-Dynamesh. And let's say we wanted some holes in here, like little holes peeking through the moss. There's one way you could do that is you can add a subtractive mesh. So you can actually come in here and let's go back to our insert mesh primitives right here. And instead of this half sphere, we'll choose an insert cylinder. And now if I click and drag on this guy, it'll just drag a cylinder. But if I hold Alt and then left click and drag on this guy, it'll create a subtractive cylinder. And it's kind of intersecting the mesh, but we want it to come all the way through. So come over to your move tool and slide this guy all the way through. It's kind of like we're piercing an ear in a weird way. And now if I clear my mask and then rerun my Dynamesh, control left click and drag, it'll actually create a little hole through that. And I don't know why, but it adds black poly paint to it. So we want to just flood this with white. Make sure that your color picker is on white, and then come up here to color and then do fill object, and then it'll get rid of that little black. Or you could have just used RGB and brushed a white texture on there. But so now I've got a hole in that geo, and I can just go like this and kind of like shape that a little bit differently. And you could just continue re-Dynameshing. And you could just continue to add these like interesting little, little holes that are real cool. So now if I just turn off Z-Add, turn on RGB, switch it to white, and then paint, it'll do the same thing that we just did in the color drop down. Just make sure that the holes are big enough that, you know, they're going to show up and they're going to make it worth your time when you print. Just re-Dynamesh. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's coming along. I think I'm going to add like a cluster of these little warts right here. Yeah, this guy's looking pretty cool. I'm just going to get this guy into space a little bit. And then using my Damien standard, I'm going to sculpt in some more of those kind of wrinkly details into the legs. And again, just use your hero one because we're off center, like I said before. And right now you can see, luckily they're not connected, so we could easily just come in here and go to polygroup, auto groups, and it's going to use, you know, topological continuity to choose the colors, and then turn off X, and then Control Shift left click tap on our hero, our master side, and then just do delete hidden. And let's just continue to just modify this guy, and let's actually add one of those fun little warts, like right here or something, and then re-Dynamesh that guy, clean it up a little. And then just continue to use our Damien standard, adding some like little wrinkle detail, and yeah, just some. And another thing you could do, if you wanted bumps to just kind of be scattered around, interestingly, you could switch to your standard brush and come over here to the stroke button and click on this guy, and you have options here. You have freehand, color spray, you have drag dot. Let's try color spray, and we'll switch over our alpha to something like this, alpha 13. And then if you click and drag, turn off RGB, turn on Z-Add. If you click and drag now, it'll add these interesting little bumps all over the place. And you could scale that way down and add like this interesting kind of scaly reptilian kind of vibe to it. But really just adds kind of a more organic surface, which is what we're going for. I think this creeper's supposed to be like a plant-based, you know, he's a vegan-made kind of a creature. Like I said, I'm sure there's some lore behind it that you true Minecraft fans are just laughing in my face. But so these little bumps are kind of cool. There's also a brush called the noise brush. This does some interesting things too. And you just run that along the surface, and it'll add these really cool little noise patterns. And like obviously this depends on the quality of your printer. If you got a really good resin-based printer, it'll pick up these details for sure. And it helps so much too. Even if there's like subtle build lines, for whatever reason, the resin printers seem to do really well with that kind of detailing, and it kind of hides any build lines that you might see. So you could run along, you know, the whole surface with this interesting little like noise pattern. Like I said, it'll definitely show up in the print. I'm running a Saturn II 8K printer, so it's a fairly high-res printer, and it'll pick up all these details. And I'm going to print it a little bit larger, probably 4 or 5 inches, and so it'll for sure pick up some of this awesomeness. And one thing that I think we kind of might have lost in our mushrooms is the interesting little striations in the sides. So I'm just going to go around and try and introduce some of that back. Maybe we just never had it. I don't know. We didn't have it in these guys for sure. So add some of the. You could do subtractive meshes too to carve these guys in. There's a number of methods to doing any of this stuff. It's kind of just what you prefer. Re-Dynamesh because we're starting to see some poly stretching, and you'll notice because we did that, we actually lost some resolution in the Dynamesh. So we'll come over here and crank this guy to like 4 something, and then rerun our Dynamesh, and then it'll maintain some of that hard work that we've done across the surface. And then like I said earlier about like the spots on these guys, you could come over here. We've already got the right alpha, so we'll switch our stroke to drag rect, and then just drag, and you can drag out these cool little bumps that would be cool for our mushrooms. And you can play around with different alphas for that too. Maybe some of these would be a better option. Something with a softer fall off, maybe. I don't know. I think I'm liking this guy the most. It's going to show up the most anyway. Poor one-legged dude here. Using clay buildup. Let's carve this guy in. The nice thing about when you re-Dynamesh is it doesn't retop everything. It's only the areas that you've modified since your last retop, since your last Dynamesh. I don't know if it was always the case, but that's a pretty cool algorithm to figure out. Like, just because, and I just modified this little area, it's only going to re-Dynamesh and rethink that area. So we don't have to worry about losing detail or fidelity in our other areas that we haven't been touching. So again, I'm going to go back to my trusty pinch brush, which I love so much, which I don't even have a hotkey for, I don't think. I guess I don't love it that much. And I think we lost maybe some of our carving details, so we'll just jump back into Damien Standard, which is my go-to for this stuff. Smoothing and you can have little bags under his eyes if you want. He's a little bit tired. So it's pretty good. Let's come down here to our alt left click over to our leg, do modify topology, and then a mirror and weld again. So now we've got these guys, and it's kind of a bummer that we have these same like warts. So we could go through and kind of get rid of those, so we're not having like a perfect symmetry. But overall, I feel like we're definitely kind of achieving the results that we want if I turn off these guys. Another way that you can easily turn on and off all of your subtools is just holding Shift. You can left click on one of the eyes, and it'll turn them all off. If you click again, it'll turn them all off. And this is valuable too, because sometimes you only want your work area to be visible. So just remember that holding Shift, and then you can add the ones that you want to be visible. And remember to just like holding Shift, drop those to the bottom or the top, keep those in your work area. And then you can always name these too. You can name this, you can come over here to rename and say like legs, and then it will rename that guy to legs. And this could be like torso, and this could be base. And the weird thing about it though is when you do a save, I click and just save over this guy, it switches the top subtool to the name of the tool itself, which is kind of lame. So a way to get around that is just append like a sphere, and then keep this guy at the top of your stack always, and then that sphere we can just come down to deformation and just deflate that guy, get it out of the way, just make it tiny or something, and just always keep that on the top of your stack. So now my work area is always going to be the bottom of the stack. So I'm going to click this guy, Shift left click on the arrow, drop it at the bottom of the stack. This is just my work area down at the bottom. And now that way, this top subtool will just inherit that name, as you can see here. Okay. Awesome. I think that's good for this video. That's a lot to chew on. It's a lot to cover. But I think we made some really good progress. In the next video, so I'm just going to save again because I'm obsessively save. In the next video, I think I'm just going to continue detailing for a few minutes, and then we'll jump right into print prep, getting it scaled to real world scale, getting it shelled, and we'll jump into Chidu Box and go through the basics of Chidu Box, getting it supported and shelled, so we can save on our resin costs and things. But I'll take a good chunk in the next video too to continue further detailing, making this thing look nice, and we'll get it ready for the printer. So again, you guys, thanks so much for watching and for your support. I love your comments. I love your feedback. And like honestly, if any of you have used ZBrush experience and you have any tips or suggestions on what I'm doing, what I could do better, please let me know in the comments. And thanks for joining me. And like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.